The price of peace. After decades of sacrificing her own dreams to raise her younger siblings, 32-year-old Josey Love is finally starting over in Atlanta. Armed with a new hotel management job and a fierce independence, she trusts no one but herself, and she certainly isn't looking for a savior. Then she meets Dyson Urquhart, the hotel's powerful CEO, who is instantly captivated by her guarded strength. Josey fights his high-end attempts to care for her at every turn, but when a dangerous billionaire guest attacks her, Dyson moves heaven and earth to protect her. Now, Josey faces her toughest choice: keep her armor locked tight, or trust the one man strong enough to keep her safe. The highway humming beneath the wheels of her 12-year-old minivan felt like a low, steady bass line to the symphony of anxiety and hope playing in Josey Love's chest. For 32 years, she had been Josey, the shield, the provider, the girl who learned to read a room for danger before she could even read a textbook. As the signs for Atlanta, Georgia began to replace the familiar landscape of Greenville, North Carolina, Josey allowed herself to do something that life had taught her many years ago was futile. She hoped. A small smile formed on her lips as she thought about the possibilities, the opportunities, and all the things she was finally going to do with her new life. Becoming an empty nester at the tender age of 32 was a concept Josey was still trying to wrap her mind around. Just weeks ago, her youngest sibling had graduated from college and accepted a job in another state. For the past 14 years, Josey had worked 2 low-paying jobs, attended PTAs, cheered at sporting events and nursed tummy aches, with all the determination of a person thrown into the deep end of a pool without a life jacket. But her role as a caretaker hadn't started at 18. It had started when she was practically a baby herself. The oldest of 4 children, Josey had been making bottles, changing diapers, and rocking her siblings to sleep since she was just 4 years old. She understood at a devastatingly early age that her mother had perfected the art of having children, but had not quite figured out that she needed to care for them once they were born. This harsh reality forced Josey to grow up quick and become the surrogate mother to her 3 younger siblings. Her childhood was defined by a chaotic cycle of frequent relocations, sudden electrical outages, and non-existent internet, all because her mother was injecting the bill money directly into her veins instead of paying them. Yet, despite the darkness at home, Josey excelled in school. School was her safe haven. It was the only place where she didn't have to be the parent, the protector, or the weary keeper of their ugly truths. At school, she could just be her. She still vividly remembered the suffocating, drowning feeling she felt when she realized she would not be going to college, as she had so meticulously planned. She used the term drowning back then to mask what it really was. A deep, simmering resentment. It wasn't directed at her innocent siblings, but at her mother and the siblings, individual fathers who had all abandoned their responsibilities. When her mother died of an overdose when Josey was 18, abandoning her own college dreams to raise the children was a complete no-brainer. She locked her desires away, threw away the key, and stepped up. Now, for the first time in her life, the nest was empty. Josey had choices. The problem was that she was entirely clueless when it came to her own wants, dreams, and desires. Her superpower for the past 28 years had been caring for others, never herself. This new normal was frightening and exciting, all at the same time. 2 weeks after her move, Josey stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her modest Decatur studio apartment. She had prepared for this next chapter, writing her goals down in a journal, and today was the day it all began. She smoothed down her crisp white blouse and black slacks. Her natural hair, freshly cut the day before, framed an ebony complexion and sharp eyes that reflected a woman who had seen way too much, way too early. She put on her small stud earrings, and adjusted an understated gold necklace with a single gold bead, the only real piece of jewelry she owned. With no makeup except a swipe of tinted lip gloss, she was satisfied with the woman looking back at her. She grabbed her purse and keys, heading out to her first day as the manager of hospitality for the Grand Monarch Hotel. When she maneuvered her minivan into the staff parking lot of the Grand Monarch Hotel and stepped inside, she stopped cold in her tracks. To call the hotel luxury was an insult. The sweeping marble, towering glass, polished brass, and a staff that had perfected the art of being simultaneously visible and invisible, was breathtaking. A profound sense of importance washed over her. She was connected to this. Josey squared her shoulders, walked to the front desk, and asked for the contact on her welcome letter. A petite lady with a hushed tone, and a polite, practiced smile, escorted her to the housekeeping department to introduce her to the staff. The day was going smoothly as Josey familiarized herself with the layouts and processes. She was in her element, managing order with the quiet precision she had practiced her whole life. Then, she saw him. He was standing in the middle of the laundry room, and the entire space seemed to physically rearrange itself to accommodate his 6-foot-plus, impeccably tailored frame. Beside him, a shift manager was visibly sweating and trembling with nerves. Josey could tell instantly that this man was someone of immense importance. As Josey was deciding how to approach the stranger standing in her domain, his eyes shifted. And found hers? Josey froze. Her chest did something weird, a sudden, indescribable flutter. Dyson Urquhart, CEO of Urquhart Industries, a massive conglomerate spanning hotels, shipping, gambling, tech, and healthcare, was not supposed to be in the basement laundry facilities. He had been upstairs reviewing security feeds when her face caught his attention on the monitor. He wasn't sure why he had felt compelled to come downstairs. Correction, he did know. It was her eyes. They were sharp, alert, and guarded, containing a haunting depth that he recognized instantly. He had come down simply to see if he could read the unknown truth hidden in her gaze. Now, standing amid the scent of crisp linens and industrial steam, Dyson looked at Josey, and the chaotic noise of the world outside completely faded away. "Hello, I am Dyson Urquhart. You must be Ms. Love," Dyson said, his voice a rich low baritone that resonated deeply in the quiet room. He stepped away from his nervous entourage and walked directly toward her, the new hospitality manager. Recognizing the name, and realizing the gravity of the CEO being in her laundry room, Josey's lifelong training kicked in. She pulled up her armor, keeping her expression neutral. "I am Mr. Urquhart," she replied, her words few but steady. "Is there an issue with the department?" A rare, genuine smile tugged at the corner of Dyson's mouth. He liked that she didn't flinch. He liked that she looked him dead in the eye, entirely unimpressed by his status, yet acutely aware of his presence. "No issue at all," Dyson said softly, stepping just a fraction closer. She did not step back as others would have, adjusting themselves to accommodate his shift. He noticed. He smiled. "I review efficiency reports carefully, and I wanted to welcome a woman of your caliber personally." Over the next few months, Dyson's presence became a constant in Josey's new life. He found endless reasons to visit the property, frequently stopping by her office. When he discovered she had enrolled in the hospitality program at Georgia Piedmont Technical College, he quietly ensured her work schedule was locked in to never conflict with her classes. For Josey, maintaining her guard and resisting the urge to read too much into his presence had become increasingly challenging. Yet her life had taught her that men often meant danger, instability, and a reason to stay vigilant. She had encountered men like Dyson before, smooth, accommodating, and seemingly harmless. She refused to let whatever he was planning distract her or succeed. The true turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Josey walked out to the parking lot, only to find her faithful 12-year-old minivan completely dead. The alternator had finally given out. Standing in the downpour, that old suffocating feeling of drowning started to creep back in. She did not have time for a breakdown, she did not want to miss work, she couldn't miss her classes, and she definitely could not afford a new car. The ghost of her childhood insecurity reared its head. Ms. Love around to see Dyson walking toward her, holding a large umbrella, entirely unbothered that the rain was ruining his expensive suit. He took one look at her defensive posture and understood everything. "Can I help?" he said gently. "No, I got it," Josey said, turning back toward the car, as if staring at the dead engine would magically fix it. "Really, Josey? Let me help you." She noticed that he called her by her first name, not Ms. Love, as he had always done during their many encounters. Hearing her name from his lips sent a warm sensation down her spine. Dyson moved forward cautiously, stepping into her space while keeping his movement casual. "I can give you a lift and have my mechanic take a look at it tomorrow. For now, you need to get out of the rain." He caught his breath, irritated at himself for allowing her to have this kind of effect on him. He had spoken in a single, rushed exhale, genuinely terrified she would shut him down before he could even finish the offer. Suddenly, the adrenaline faded, and Josey became sharply aware of the biting chill. Her body trembled slightly. Defeated, desperate and cold, she moved a fraction closer to Dyson, and gave a tight nod. They walked back to his car in a heavy silence. For the first time in his life, Dyson found himself terrified of saying the wrong thing or offending someone. So he chose to say nothing at all. But even without words, Josey was painfully aware of his presence. She noticed how he consciously shortened his commanding 6 feet 2 inches stride to match her 5 feet 4 inches pace, and how he gently guided her to his inside hip, shielding her from the oncoming traffic and splashing water. "You are soaked," he murmured, draping his suit jacket over her shoulders as he opened the passenger door, welcoming the sudden wall of warmth and the faint, intoxicating scent of his cologne. She wrapped it tighter around herself. "Thank you." "Where to?" he asked, starting the ignition. "Piedmont Tech." Trying to strike a casual tone, he glanced over. "How are your classes going?" A genuine smile broke through her exhaustion. "Great. I'm just taking the general education classes right now. I won't get into my major until later." Hearing the pure joy in her voice when she spoke about school made an unprompted smile tug at Dyson's lips. When he pulled up to the campus curb, he looked at her. "How are you getting home later?" "MARTA," she replied easily. "The buses don't stop running until midnight, and my class ends at 8:40. "I see. Have a good night, Josey." "You too. And thank you for the ride." If Josey had been offered $1,000 to recall a single sentence of tonight's lecture, she would still have exactly $22 in her wallet. The thought of Dyson Urquhart invaded every corner of her mind. The lingering scent of his jacket, the deep resonance of his voice when he said her name, the heat radiating from him in the enclosed car, and the way he looked at her, as if the rest of the world had completely faded away, shook her to her core. It left her daydreaming like a schoolgirl, staring blankly at the whiteboard. Meanwhile, outside in the dark, Dyson was having a war with himself. "Go home, man." She said she was taking the bus. "She doesn't need you to stay," he kept repeating. Yet, for the past 90 minutes, his car hadn't moved an inch from the spot where he dropped her off. The engine was dead silent. He hadn't even attempted to turn the key. He was staying until she came out, and that was that. When the campus doors finally opened, Josey stepped into the night and spotted his vehicle immediately. Dyson knew the exact moment she saw him because that look crossed her face, a fierce, unyielding glare that struck a sudden spike of fear in his chest. It frustrated and confused him that a woman a foot shorter than him could make his pulse race like this. She marched straight to the driver's side window. Dyson took a slow, deliberate breath, using the few seconds it took to roll down the glass to prepare himself for her cold stare. He cleared his throat. "It's too late for you to be riding public transportation. I decided to wait and give you a ride home." A heavy pause settled between them. Josey searched his eyes, her jaw clenched. "Mr. Urquhart," she began. "Dyson," he interrupted. Her words caught in her throat, blinking in confusion. "Call me Dyson," he said smoothly. "I don't think that's appropriate. You're my boss's boss." Once again, he cut her off. "Okay, call me Mr. Urquhart when we're at work, and Dyson when we're not. But for now, it's getting late, and I'm trying to give you a lift. Please, Josey, get in the car." Frustration flickered across his face at how stubborn she was and how she had reduced him to pleading for her to accept a ride home. He was devastatingly handsome. No, he was simply fine. The way he said her name disarmed Josey. A pause. Finally, she exhaled softly. "Thank you," she said, turning on her heel to walk back around to the passenger side. The ride to her house wasn't entirely uncomfortable, but it certainly wasn't a fluid conversation. It was not lost on Josey that he said to call him Mr. Urquhart at work and Dyson when we're not, as if he had plans for them to spend time together outside of work. That thought both excited and frightened her. Dyson, however, did manage to ask about her morning routine, inquiring what time she had to leave for work when relying on the transit system. "I have to take a bus and a train," she explained, looking out the window, "which means I need to be at the bus stop by 6:45 a.m. Dyson quietly memorized the time, mentally logging it to pass along to a private car service later. He knew she would resist. She was going to be upset. In fact, who was he kidding? She was going to be absolutely pissed. Which made the next thing he was planning seem completely insane. He was already arranging to have her broken-down car towed and repaired without her permission. At 6:40 a.m., the roar of a sleek black town car cutting into Josey's quiet neighborhood broke the morning silence. Josey stepped onto her parking lot, coffee mug in hand. A professional driver in a crisp suit stepped out, holding open the rear door. "Miss Josey, Mr. Urquhart sent me to take you to work." Josey's jaw set into a hard, dangerous line. "You can tell Mr. Urquhart thank you, but no. Thanks that I have a MARTA pass. I will be taking the bus to work." The driver, looking entirely caught in the middle of a battle he wanted no part of, offered a polite but strained smile. "Ma'am, with all due respect, if I leave here without you I lose my contract. And Mr. Urquhart explicitly mentioned that I am not to leave without you despite how much you resist." Frustrated, her chest heaving with indignation, Josey looked down the street toward the distant bus stop, then back at the luxury vehicle. Realizing she was running out of time and she didn't want to risk being late to work, she let out a sharp growl of defeat. "Fine," she muttered, storming down the steps and throwing herself into the leatherback seat. By lunchtime, Josey was practically vibrating with anger. She marched into the corporate high-rise where Dyson worked, bypassing the receptionist with a look that dared anyone to stop her. When she pushed open the heavy double doors to Dyson's private office, she was briefly stalled by the sheer opulence of it. The room was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, rich mahogany built-ins, and plush leather seating that screamed old money and absolute control. Dyson sat behind a massive desk. He looked up, entirely unbothered, though a spark of amusement flared in his dark eyes. "You have some nerve." Josey bypassed any greetings, marching right up to his desk. "A private car, and then I get a call telling me my van has been towed to a premium dealership on your dime. Do you know what this looks like? People will start talking. They're probably already running their mouths as we speak," she said through clenched teeth, her eyes narrowing. "Your car was a safety hazard, Josey," Dyson said calmly, standing up. His sheer size immediately shifted the dynamic of the room. He stepped out from behind the desk, closing the distance between them. "There he goes again with her first name, removing some of her sting. You are way too far into my business," she snapped, though the fire in her tone had softened slightly as she tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. She was irritated to her core, but as he drew closer, her body betrayed her. The air between them grew thick, heavy and electric. Josey's breath hitched, her body tensing as a sudden wave of heat coursed through her veins. Dyson wasn't faring any better. Up close, the fiery defiance in her eyes sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight to his body. His heart hammered against his ribs, his eyes darkening as they tracked the rapid rise and fall of her chest. He wanted to break her pride, but he wanted to wrap his hands around her waist even more. "I am making sure you are safe," Dyson said, his voice dropping an octave, thick with a tension that had nothing to do with cars or logistics. "I don't need you to keep me safe. I am an adult. I have been protecting myself and others all my life," Josey fiercely whispered, though she couldn't tear her eyes away from his lips. Shocked by her own physical reaction to him, she forced herself to take a step back, breaking the spell. She threw her hands up in the air, dismissing him entirely. "Do not ever order a car for me again. I mean it." Without giving him a chance to respond, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the office, closing the heavy mahogany door behind her. Left alone, in the quiet luxury of his office, Dyson let out a low, rough breath. A slow, genuinely amused smile spread across his face as he shook his head. Her stubbornness was infuriating, and her pride was unyielding, and he had never been more captivated in his entire life. A week later, as Josey stepped out into the office parking lot, because despite her protests, the private car kept appearing, she suddenly halted in her tracks. Sitting in her usual spot was her minivan. It wasn't just repaired, it looked completely transformed. The body had been meticulously detailed, the bumper replaced, the cracked back and passenger windows swapped out, the rust spots replaced with fresh paint, the headlights clear and restored, and it sat high on a brand new set of premium tires. Dazed, she hesitated and tried the handle. It was unlocked, the torn upholstery had been replaced, a new sound system and navigation system installed. She opened the glove box and found her keys resting neatly inside. When she turned the ignition, the engine purred with a smoothness it hadn't possessed in years. The gas gauge pointed steadily to full, and a blast of perfectly calibrated warm air immediately filled the cabin. The heat fixed. The engine light flickered off. Josey was speechless. Tears streamed down her face. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes before finally driving away. Dyson watched from the security feed. She made her way home in total silence, the soft hum of the impeccably repaired vehicle only tightening the knot in her stomach. The moment she let herself into her apartment, she called Tracy. Tracy lived just across the hall. The two had bonded instantly on Josey's very first day, moving into the complex 3 months ago. Their friendship was forged in the fires of survival. They both knew what it meant to grow up entirely too fast. Josey had spent her childhood navigating her mother's drug addiction, while Tracy had raised her own younger siblings to shield them from their mother's alcoholism. They were women who didn't know how to lean on anyone because, historically, anyone they leaned on broke. Josey laid out everything that had transpired over the last 7 days. The rain, the 90-minute wait, the luxury office, the car service, and now, the pristine minivan. Tracy listened quietly before voicing the unwritten rule they both lived by. Nothing is free, Josey. You know that. Nobody does something that massive without expecting a return on their investment. That's exactly what scares me, Josey admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Dyson Urquhart is not a man I want to be in debt to. I don't care if he says he wants nothing in return. Men like him always collect. So what are you going to do? Tomorrow, Josey said firmly. I'm going to tell him I'm paying him back in monthly installments. Every single cent. I won't owe him a single penny. The next day, Josey returned to the 15th floor. This time there was no fit of blind rage. She didn't storm past the desks or burn holes through the staff with her eyes. Instead, she approached the executive receptionist, politely asked if Mr. Urquhart was available, and waited patiently. When the receptionist escorted her in, Dyson looked up from his paperwork. The thick, electric tension from their past encounters still lingered in the air, but Josey kept her composure tightly locked down. Thank you for seeing me, she began, her tone measured and professional. And thank you for the van. I genuinely appreciate what you did. It runs better than it ever has. Dyson leaned back, watching her intently. But I cannot just accept it, she said, stepping closer to his desk. I want to pay you back. I'm offering to set up a monthly installment plan until the debt is fully settled. Dyson read the rigid determination in her posture. He recognized the fierce defensive pride radiating off her, and he realized that if he refused, he would lose her entirely. She needed him to accept these terms to feel safe. All right, Dyson said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. I agree to a repayment plan. I'll have my assistant draw up the paperwork. A visible wave of relief washed over Josey's shoulders. The tension in her jaw relaxed. Thank you, she said, giving him a single appreciative nod before turning and walking out of the office. Once again, he was amused and intrigued by her, fully aware of the effect she had on him. The following morning, an internal envelope was delivered to Josey's desk. Inside was the formal repayment agreement. Josey pulled out the sheet, scanned down to the total balance, and blinked. She blinked again, rubbing her eyes, hoping desperately that she was misreading the numbers. $31,835. Josey dropped her head into her hands. For a fleeting, weak second, she genuinely wished she was one of those women who just expected men to do things for them. The kind of woman who could smile, accept an expensive luxury upgrade, and never offer a dime in return. Instead, she was staring at a bill that was going to choke her budget for the foreseeable future. But she signed it anyway. A week later, Josey was in the break room when she overheard a couple of her department co-workers talking excitedly. Did you check your pay stub yet? I can't believe management actually pushed it through. Curiosity piqued, Josey hurried back to her desk and logged into the employee portal to view her latest electronic pay stub. Her eyes widened. Her net pay had increased significantly. She pulled out a calculator, her heart hammering against her ribs. She calculated the exact difference between her old paycheck and her new one, factoring in the monthly installment deduction she owed Dyson. The corporate raise was twice the exact cent-by-cent amount of her monthly debt payment to him. Arming herself with the pay stub, she marched straight back up to the 15th floor and into Dyson's office. What is this? She demanded, holding up the printout. Dyson didn't even look up from his tablet. It looks like a paycheck, Josey. There he goes again, disarming her with the familiarity of using her first name, she thought. Don't play dumb with me. My pay increase is the exact double amount of my monthly installment to you. Dyson finally looked up, his face an unreadable mask of cool indifference. The entire department received a market rate salary adjustment this week. Look around you. Everyone got a raise. You didn't receive any special treatment. Josey stood straighter, her voice a sharp whisper. And the fact that the number matched exactly twice my monthly debt, down to the penny. Dyson shrugged his broad shoulders, a tiny, teasing glint appearing at the corner of his eye. Coincidence, he said smoothly. A pause. He stood and moved in front of her. You know, if I didn't know better, Ms. Love, I'd think you're deliberately creating these moments of indignation-filled confrontations as an excuse to see me. He smiled, standing there in a way that made the outside world seem to shrink away. He continued, taking a step closer, until he was just inches in front of her. "If you want to see me, just ask. You don't have to make up excuses," he finished with the most irritating smile curling his lips. Completely disarmed, she turned and left his office. He let out a small laugh, and returned to the task at hand. The air on the VIP floor of the hotel usually smelled of expensive citrus and quiet money. It was a typical Saturday morning, and Josey was methodically completing her inspections, ensuring the high-profile suites were flawless. Her mind wandered, as it often did lately, to Dyson. He had been gone for about 4 weeks, Seoul, he had told her, mentioning it with an engineered air of casual indifference during one of his planned/unplanned drop-ins to her department. He was meeting with international investors regarding a massive new tourist destination project he was eyeing. She had no idea that his private jet had touched down early that morning. Completely jet-lagged but driven by an overwhelming primal need to see her, Dyson hadn't even gone home. He went straight to the hotel. Down in the security hub, Dyson stood staring at the monitors. "You know, Brentson, his head of security and longtime close friend, remarked dryly, the way you're staring at that screen has all the makings of a creepy horror movie." The fact was not lost on Dyson. He rubbed his tired eyes, a faint, self-deprecating smirk tugging at his mouth. But a second later, the smirk vanished. His posture went rigid. On the screen displaying the 13th floor, something caught his attention. Who was that with her? Josey was standing near the doorway of an open suite. The feed showed her body language shift. She was trying to leave. The man stepped into her path, blocking her. Josey attempted to politely step around him, but he moved with her, cutting off her exit. With a sudden, aggressive lurch, he shoved her backward, forcing her deep into the room and out of the camera's view. Dyson didn't breathe. He was already on the move, bolting toward the door while ripping his phone from his pocket. "Brentson!" Dyson barked into the line, his voice vibrating with a terrifying edge. "Meet me on the 13th floor. Room 1311. Now!" Inside room 1311, Josey's blood ran cold as the reality of her situation hit her like ice water. Cameron Carter, the billionaire sole heir to the Carter Electric dynasty, had decided that Josey was simply a possession. A perk of the hotel, something he could take at will. Before she could even scream, Cameron cornered her against the mattress. He lunged, pinning her violently to the bed. His mouth slammed down over hers to smother her cries, his hands tearing frantically at her clothes. Panic flared, but then her old instincts kicked in. Her mind rushed in a dozen directions at once, the fear of the inevitable sending her into complete fight mode. She thrashed, scratching, biting and fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed. Outside, Dyson hit the 13th floor in record time. The heavy fatigue of a 14-hour flight was instantly incinerated, replaced by a toxic cocktail of sheer terror and blinding rage. As he neared the door, he heard it, the muffled noises and desperate scuffling from within. The heavy oak door didn't just open, it exploded inward under the weight of Dyson's foot. Dyson took in the scene in a fraction of a second. He crossed the distance from the threshold to the bed in a blur of motion. Before Cameron even realized the door had been breached, Dyson's hands locked onto his collar. With a roar of pure fury, Dyson ripped him off Josey and hurled him across the room. Cameron hit the wall so hard the drywall indented, leaving a hollow crater where his body slammed before he crumbled to the floor. Dyson didn't stop. He advanced on the air like a predator. His fist connected with Cameron's jaw, and a spray of blood erupted across the carpet. Completely engulfed in raw emotion, Dyson rained his fists down, striking Cameron's face several more times with brutal, rhythmic finality. Brentson burst into the room a beat later. Satisfied that Josey was unhurt for the most part, the security chief turned his attention to the sheer brutality unfolding against the wall. "Dyson, stop! Look at me! Go to Josey!" Brentson yelled, physically throwing his weight into pulling Dyson back. Dyson stood panting, his knuckles split and bleeding. He glared down at Cameron, whose face was already an unrecognizable mask of swelling. One eye was completely swollen shut, his lips were split wide, and a dislodged tooth lay on the floor beside him, forcing his chest to slow down. Dyson fought to refocus his attention. He turned to Josey. She was standing by the bed, sheer terror etched into every line of her face. Her eyes were fixed on the bloody heap on the floor, her body shaking violently. When Dyson stepped toward her, she recoiled slightly, an instinctual reflex. "Josey," he said, his voice instantly dropping its murderous edge, becoming low, soothing and desperately reassuring. "You are safe. I am here, baby." At his words, the adrenaline drained from her, and her legs completely gave out. Dyson caught her before she hit the floor, pulling her small, trembling body into his arms. He lifted her effortlessly. "What room is open?" Dyson demanded, looking at Brenson. 1325. Brenson replied immediately, already pulling out his radio to seal the floor. Dyson carried her down the hall to room 1325. The moment he laid her down, he dialed his assistant, Mrs. Sawyer. He gave her a brutal, two-sentence summary of the event, and told her to meet him at the room immediately. Once inside the safety of the new suite, the dam broke. The realization of what had almost happened hit Josey like a truck. She sprung up from the bed, pacing wildly. "This is my fault," she choked out, the tears finally spilling over. "How did I miss that look? I know that look. I should have seen him coming." Her voice cracked between heavy, ragged sobs. She was furious with herself. She had let the luxury of the hotel, the prestige of the high-paying guests, lull her into a false sense of security. In her previous life she would have spotted a man like Cameron Carter a mile away, but here she had gotten too comfortable. She had actually believed the polite, polished facade they displayed to the world. "How could I have been so stupid?" she whispered fiercely, more to herself than to the man watching her with a breaking heart. Dyson moved in, wrapping his arms tightly around her, anchoring her against his chest. A moment later, the door opened, and Mrs. Sawyer stepped in. She was a middle-aged woman, whose very presence seemed to possess the unique ability to neutralize chaos. Taking in the scene in a single glance, Mrs. Sawyer's eyes bypassed Dyson and looked straight at Josey. "You are not alone," Mrs. Sawyer said, her voice steady and immovable. "You will not fight alone." There was something about the absolute certainty in the older woman's words that allowed the spinning room to steady for Josey. She looked up, realizing Dyson was still holding her tightly. This time she didn't try to pull away. "Cameron will be dealt with," Dyson murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion as he apologized to her for the 5th time in the span of several minutes. A quiet knock at the door interrupted them. A hotel courier delivered a large, unmarked package. Inside was a complete set of clothes, down to a new bra and underwear in Josey's exact size, alongside luxury personal care products that easily cost more than her monthly rent. Another knock followed. The police had arrived. An even-toned policewoman entered, asking Josey a series of gentle, carefully thought-out questions. When she politely asked to take photos of Josey's minor scrapes and torn clothes for evidence, Josey quietly complied. Once the officers left, Mrs. Sawyer handed Josey the package of clothes. "Go take a hot shower," she instructed softly. Josey nodded numbly and walked into the bathroom. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut, the silence in the room stretched taut. The memory of the sheer terror in Josey's face, and the agonizing way she blamed herself, reignited Dyson's rage. He began to pace the room like a caged animal, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Mrs. Sawyer stepped into his path. "She is going to be okay. I will see to it personally," she said. Then, her face hardened into an expression Dyson had never seen before. "As for you, don't let that bastard get away with this." Dyson stilled. He had known Mrs. Sawyer since the early cutthroat days of founding Urquhart Industries. He had seen her handle crisis after crisis, and he had even seen her back down an irate, towering contractor without blinking, but he had never seen her angry. "I won't," Dyson replied, a deadly promise in his eyes. In the bathroom, Josey stood under the shower, letting the blistering warmth of the water wash over her skin. The tears came hot, fast and relentlessly, mingling with the spray. She stayed there until her skin was flushed, and her breathing finally leveled out. When she emerged, dressed in the pristine new clothes, Dyson and Mrs. Sawyer were waiting. Dyson immediately moved toward her, his gaze scanning her face. "Come on," he said softly. "I'm taking you home." "I'm okay," Josey murmured automatically, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. "I can drive." Dyson stopped and looked down at her. He didn't argue, but the sheer, protective intensity in his dark eyes caused the words to catch in her throat. She realized there was no winning this argument. She gave a small, defeated nod and allowed him to lead her out of the hotel through the private executive elevator. A few minutes later, Josey settled into the lush, buttery soft leather seats of Dyson's black Bentley Bentayga. She had never known luxury on this magnitude even existed. Looking around the hyper-customized silent cabin of the ultra-exclusive SUV, a small, sudden giggle escaped her lips. The sheer absurd contrast of the over-the-top indulgence against the nightmare of her morning hitting her all at once. Dyson started the engine, glancing over at her, unsure of what the sudden laugh meant. His brow furrowed with concern. "Are you okay?" Josey looked out the window as the city began to move past, the warmth of the seat heater sinking into her bones. "Yes," she said softly. And for the first time that day, she believed it. 3 days after the assault, the luxury of the Bentley felt like a distant memory, as Josey walked toward her modest minivan in the hotel's staff parking lot. Josey's thoughts were punctured by the sudden slam of a car door. 2 men in tailored grey suits stepped into her path. Their expressions were sterile, devoid of any human warmth. "Miss Love," the older one said, his voice dropping like an anchor in the quiet garage. He didn't ask her name, he knew it. He pulled a thick, embossed manila envelope from his breast pocket. "We represent the Carter family. We're here to offer you a generous life transition package. $500,000. You sign this non-disclosure agreement, and we all move on." Josey froze, her hand gripping her car keys so tightly the metal bit into her palm. "I'm pressing charges." The younger man let out a short, mocking breath. "Don't be naive. People like Cameron Carter don't go to jail. They don't even go to police stations. Take the money, buy a nice house somewhere far away, and forget this happened. If you push this, your life will become a public circus. We will dig up every mistake you've ever made, and you will end up with nothing." "She won't be signing anything." The deep, gravelly voice echoed through the air. Dyson moved toward the scene, Brenson in step beside him. Dyson's presence seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the air. The lawyers straightened, trying to maintain their composure. "Mr. Urquhart, this is a private matter regarding Carter Electric." "This is my hotel, which makes it my business," Dyson interrupted, stepping directly between the men and Josey, his towering frame completely shielding her. "And more importantly, she is mine to protect. Brenson, escort these pieces of trash off my property. If they, or anyone else representing the Carters, breathe the same air as Josey again, I won't call the police. I'll handle it myself." Brenson stepped forward with a cold, stern stare. The lawyers, realizing they were entirely outmatched, aggressively shoved the envelope back into their pockets, gave Josey a final, warning glare, and retreated to their vehicle. Dyson turned to Josey, his eyes scanning her face for any signs of panic. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Josey answered, her voice shaking but her eyes fierce. "A man like Cameron doesn't do something this brazen unless he's gotten away with it before." Dyson's jaw tightened, a muscle leaping in his cheek. "No, he isn't getting away with it this time." Within 48 hours, Dyson mobilized the full weight of Urquhart Industries' investigative resources. What they uncovered was a sickening, decades-long pattern of abuse. Dyson sat across from Josey and Mrs. Sawyer in his private office, tossing a thick black binder onto the desk. 8 different women, 2 former secretaries, 3 intern, 1 ex-girlfriend and 2 hospitality workers, had brought formal accusations of sexual assault against Cameron Carter over the last 7 years. In every single case, the Carter family dynasty used their immense wealth to execute aggressive, terrifying smear campaigns against the victims. Millions of dollars in hush money were paid out through offshore accounts to bury the charges and completely scrub the stories from the media before they could ever hit the press. They systematically destroyed these women's lives to protect their heir, Mrs. Sawyer said, her voice trembling with an uncharacteristic icy rage. "They won't destroy yours," Dyson said, looking directly at Josey. "The Carters think they own the local justice system. They're trying to pull strings behind the scenes right now to get the DA to drop the charges. But they forget that Urquhart Industries holds the keys to this city's infrastructure. I've already called the governor and the district attorney. I told them if Cameron Carter doesn't face a judge, I pull all tech and transit investments from the state. They cannot afford to protect him anymore." The trial of the state versus Cameron Carter became the scandal of the decade. The Carter Electric dynasty tried desperately to keep the proceedings behind closed doors, but Dyson used his massive media leverage to ensure the courtroom doors remained wide open to the public. Every news outlet in the country plastered Cameron's mugshot across their front pages. The courtroom was suffocatingly hot, packed to capacity with reporters, executives, and onlookers. Cameron sat at the defense table, stripped of his usual smug arrogance, looking pale and manic in a high-end navy suit. His powerful family sat in the front row behind him, glaring at Josey, as if she were the criminal. But Josey refused to look at them. She sat at the prosecution's table, her spine straight. When it was her turn to take the stand, she looked directly at the jury and recounted the nightmare in room 1311, with a devastating, quiet clarity. The defense attempted to tear her character apart, hinting at gold-digging motives, brining up her mother's drug addiction, but the prosecution, backed by the airtight forensic evidence Dyson's security team had preserved, alongside the damning security footage of Cameron forcing her into the room, shredded the defense's narrative. To ensure the nail was driven firmly into the coffin, Dyson's legal team successfully pushed to allow the deposition details of the 5 previous victims to be introduced as evidence of a habitual predatory pattern. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The Carter Electric stock market valuation plummeted by 30% in a single afternoon. The dynasty was crumbling in real time. After 3 agonizing days of deliberation, the jury returned. On the sole count of attempted sexual assault, we find the defendant, Cameron Carter, guilty. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Cameron slumped into his chair, his mother letting out a sharp cry behind him. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly grown disgusted by the Carter family's attempts to subvert the law, didn't hold back during sentencing. She banged her gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. Mr. Carter, your wealth and your family's legacy have insulated you from the consequences of your horrific actions for far too long. You viewed women not as human beings, but as property to be taken at your whim. That ends today. She leveled a harsh gaze at the defense table. I sentence you to 5 years in a maximum security state penitentiary, with no eligibility for early parole. Take him into custody. The courtroom erupted into a frenzy of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. Handcuffs clicked loudly around Cameron's wrists as bailiffs aggressively pulled him toward the holding cell door. For the first time, Cameron looked truly terrified, realizing his family's money could no longer save him. Amidst the chaos, Dyson stood up, ignoring the reporters throwing microphones in his direction. He stepped over to Josey, who was letting out a long, shuddering breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, his chin resting on the top of her head. It's over, Dyson murmured softly as the world buzzed frantically around them. He's never going to hurt you, or anyone else, ever again. The chaos of the courtroom was still ringing in their ears as they made their way down to the secure parking garage. Dyson kept his arm tightly around Josey's waist, shielding her from the distant shouting of the press corps. Just as they reached the black Bentley, Brenson's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened grimly for a few seconds, and hung up. He turned to Dyson, his expression deadpan. We've got a problem. Reporters found out where Josey lives. There's a swarm of them outside her apartment building right now, cameras rolling, waiting to ambush her. Josey's heart sank. Dyson didn't even blink. You're not going back there. You're staying with me at my place until this whole circus dies down. Josey looked up at him, startled. Dyson, I can't just move into your house. It's not an argument, Josey, Dyson said softly, his voice leaving no room for negotiation but carrying an underlying warmth that made her stomach flip. You're staying with me, let's go. Dyson's home was nestled in Tuxedo Park, the most exclusive, old-money pocket of Buckhead in Atlanta, Georgia. As the Bentley glided through the massive wrought-iron security gates, a sprawling English manor-style estate came into view. The house was a masterpiece of limestone and slate, framed by centuries-old oaks and perfectly manicured formal gardens that whispered of immense, quiet wealth. Inside, the luxury was staggering but refined. Cathedral ceilings, with exposed hand-hewn beams stretched overhead, and floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a limestone terrace and an infinity-edge pool that seemed to bleed into the private woods beyond. The domestic staff appeared almost instantly, moving with an eerie, flawless efficiency that only true luxury could buy. Yet there was no cold formality here. Their kindness was immediate. An elegant, silver-haired head housekeeper named Celestine stepped forward, her eyes warm with genuine concern as she looked at Josey. Welcome home, Mr. Urquhart. Miss Josey, it is an absolute pleasure to have you, Celestine said gently. We have prepared the eastern wing for you. Your things have already been brought over, and anything else you need will be taken care of immediately. Thank you, Josey murmured, overwhelmed by the seamless hospitality and confusion as to when did he have time to do all of this. Dyson led Josey up the grand winding staircase to her quarters. He opened the double doors, and Josey stopped in her tracks. Dyson, you said this was a guest room? She breathed. It is, he said. Calling it a guest room was an understatement of hilarious proportions. It was a palatial suite that rivaled the presidential quarters at his hotel. The floors were heated herringbone white oak, covered by a plush silk-woven rug. A massive king-sized bed sat at the center, dressed in thousands of dollars worth of crisp, Egyptian cotton linens, and a cloud-like goose-down duvet. A private limestone fireplace crackled softly in the corner, and the adjacent master bath featured a freestanding marble soaking tub with views of the estate. It was a sanctuary of pure, unadulterated indulgence. "Get settled," Dyson said, his voice dropping a register as he stepped a little closer, his gaze lingering on her lips. "I'll be downstairs." Later that evening the house grew quiet. The storm of the trial had finally settled, leaving behind a heavy, electric stillness. Josey walked down to the main living room. The lights were dimmed low, and the ambient glow of the massive fireplace cast long, flickering shadows across the room. Dyson was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his thick, powerful forearms. Hearing her footsteps, he turned. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and the air in the room instantly grew thick, charged with a sudden, suffocating tension. They had been through hell together over the past few weeks, their emotions stretched to the absolute limit, and now, completely alone, the restraint they had practiced was rapidly disintegrating. Josey walked toward him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you for everything." Dyson set his glass down on a marble side table. He didn't close the distance between them, he waited for her. "You don't ever have to thank me, Josey." When she stopped just inches from him, the heat radiating off his body was intoxicating. Dyson reached out, his large hand gently cupping her jaw. Josey let out a soft, shaky breath, leaning into his touch. The tension snapped. Dyson pulled her against him, his arm locking around her waist as his mouth descended onto hers. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was hungry, a passionate, fierce release from all the fear, rage, and burning desire he had been suppressing for months. Josey gasped into his mouth, her hands tangling into his thick hair, pulling him closer as she met his intensity with her own. He tasted like bourbon and heat. Dyson groaned, his grip tightening, lifting her slightly off her feet as he pressed her back against the edge of the plush sofa, completely consuming her. Ahem. The sharp, deliberate clearing of a throat cut through the silence like a knife. They broke apart, panting. Dyson's eyes were dark, heavy with desire, and his chest was heaving. He slowly turned his head toward the arched entryway, his face instantly contorting into an expression of murderous frustration. Brenson was leaning against the doorframe, a tablet in his hand, looking completely unfazed. "I apologize for the horrific timing," Brenson said, his voice dripping with an amused cat that got the cream smirk. He looked at Dyson's disheveled hair and the sheer rage radiating from his boss, and a broad grin broke across his face. "But the Koreans are on the secure line. We need your approval on some paperwork regarding the project." Dyson closed his eyes, taking a deep, ragged breath to control the sudden spike in his blood pressure. He glared at his head of security. "Brenson, I am going to fire you. And then I am going to throw you off the terrace." Brenson chuckled, entirely unimpressed by the threat. "Understood, boss. Line 1. With a wink at Josey, Brenson turned and strolled down the hall. Dyson let out a low, frustrated curse, rubbing a hand over his face. The absolute agony of the interruption was written in every line of his rigid posture. He turned back to Josey. His gaze dropped down to her swollen lips, his dark eyes flashing with a silent promise. He reached out, running the back of his fingers down her cheek, his voice a low, gravelly velvet. "We are going to continue this," Dyson murmured, his promise hanging heavy in the air. "At another time." Josey could only nod, her cheeks flushed, watching him walk away into the shadows of the mansion. The next evening, the heavy, electric anticipation that had been building since their interrupted kiss reached a fever pitch. Dyson had asked Josey out for dinner, a real first date, away from the shadow of the trial and the confines of the hotel. Upstairs in her palatial guest suite, Josey stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror, a nervous, thrilled flutter dancing in her stomach. Laid across the silk duvet were 3 breathtaking designer dresses Mrs. Sawyer had quietly delivered earlier that afternoon. After much deliberation, she chose a floor-length backless silk slip dress in a deep, midnight emerald. When she slipped it on, the fabric clung to her curves like liquid water. She left her hair down in soft, cascading waves, added a touch of mascara and a swipe of berry-toned lipstick, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like a survivor, or an employee, or a victim. She felt like a desired woman. Downstairs in the grand foyer, Dyson was waiting. He had discarded his usual corporate armor for a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit, a black silk dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and no tie. His broad shoulders filled out the jacket perfectly, his dark hair freshly styled. He was pacing, but the moment he heard the soft click of her heels on the limestone stairs, he froze. He looked up. The effect she had on him was instantaneous and visible. Dyson's breath caught sharply in his throat. His dark eyes darkened even further, dilated with a raw, possessive heat as they tracked her slow descent. His gaze swept over the exposed skin of her collarbones, the way the emerald silk draped over her hips, and along the line of her legs. Josey, too, felt the air leave her lungs. Seeing him standing there, completely focused on her with an intensity that could melt iron, made her knees weak. When she reached the bottom step, Dyson didn't say a word at first. He simply stepped into her space, the intoxicating scent of his woodsy, expensive cologne enveloping her. He reached out, his large, warm hand settling against the bare skin of her lower back, sending a violent jolt of electricity straight up her spine. "Josey," he murmured, his voice a low, rough growl of pure admiration. "You are absolutely breathtaking. I don't know how I'm expected to keep my hands off you tonight." A beautiful flush crept up her neck. "You look pretty incredible yourself, Mr. Urquhart," she teased softly, her eyes shining. Dyson let out a low, breathless laugh, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her temple. "Let's go, before I change my mind about leaving this house." Dyson's driver took them to Le Jardin des Étoiles, an hyper-exclusive Michelin-starred restaurant tucked away in a private estate in Buckhead. The venue was the epitome of expensive, old-world romance. They were escorted past the main dining room to a private, glass-walled gazebo in the rear gardens, illuminated entirely by thousands of twinkling fairy lights and a canopy of white roses. The dinner was a masterclass in culinary luxury. They were served a 7-course tasting menu featuring delicate truffle-infused pastries, perfectly seared Wagyu beef, and rare vintage champagne that bubbled like liquid gold in crystal flutes. Yet, for all the opulence surrounding them, neither of them could focus entirely on the food. The air between them was thick, charged with the lingering tension of the previous night. Across the candlelit table, Dyson's gaze never left her. He held her hand between courses, his thumb methodically stroking the sensitive skin of her wrist, sending micro-shocks of desire through her system. They laughed, they talked about their childhoods, and for the first time, the heavy weight of the world melted away completely. By the time the Bentley pulled back through the iron gates of the Tuxedo Park estate, the silence in the car was suffocatingly hot. The moment the front door closed behind them, Dyson didn't wait. He caught Josey's hand and led her up the grand staircase, straight into her bedroom. The fire in her room was already lit, casting a warm amber glow across the massive king bed. Dyson turned her around, pinning her gently against the closed bedroom door. The playfulness of the date was gone, replaced by a fierce, consuming gravity. He framed her face with his large hands, looking deep into her eyes. "Josey, look at me," he commanded softly, his voice thick with an emotion so raw it made her heart ache. "When I saw him putting his hands on you on that monitor, my heart stopped. I realized in that exact second that if anything happened to you, my world would end. I've tried to be patient, I've tried to give you space, but I can't keep it inside anymore." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm on her skin. I love you so completely, Josey, with everything I have." Tears of pure, overwhelming happiness welled in Josey's eyes. The last remnants of her fear and hesitation dissolved. She reached up, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck. "I love you too, Dyson," she whispered fiercely against his lips. "I love you so much." Dyson groaned, a sound of pure relief and fierce possession, and slammed his mouth down onto hers. The kiss was deep, passionate, and laced with a profound tenderness. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapping instinctively around his waist as he carried her across the room and lowered her onto the plush, cloud-like mattress. With agonizing slowness, Dyson reached behind her, his fingers finding the zipper of the emerald dress. He lowered it, the silk sliding down her skin like a whisper, exposing her to the warm firelight. When he looked at her, his eyes held nothing but reverence. He stripped out of his jacket and shirt, his powerful, muscular chest and broad shoulders casting a shadow over her. When he came over to her, his touch was a perfect balance of fierce passion and absolute gentleness. He kissed his way down her jaw, her throat, and the sensitive dip of her collarbone, his hands mapping every inch of her body as if committing her to memory. Josey arched into his touch, her hands gripping the muscles of his back, a soft sigh escaping her lips as his mouth found hers again. Their lovemaking was intense, deliberate, and deeply emotional. Every touch was a reassurance of safety, every breath a declaration of love. Dyson moved against her with a slow, heavy rhythm that drove them both to the brink of madness, his dark eyes locked onto hers the entire time, ensuring she was with him every step of the way. Josey tangled her fingers in his hair, pulling him down, completely lost in the overwhelming wave of heat and affection spinning through her. The world outside, the press, the trial, the Carters, faded into absolute nothingness. There was only the crackle of the fire, the slick heat of their skin, and the breathless, whispered promises of love exchanged in the dark. When the final, shattering wave of release finally overtook them, Dyson held her tightly against his chest, shielding her, anchoring her to him, as they tumbled over the edge together. Hours later, the fire had burned down to embers. Josey lay with her head on Dyson's bare chest, listening to the steady, comforting beat of his heart. His powerful arm was wrapped securely around her waist, pulling her flush against his side, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. She finally drifted off to sleep. She was safe. She was loved. 5 years later, the humid Atlanta air was alive, with the sound of live music and the clinking of crystal. The trajectory of Josey's life had shifted entirely from that fateful Saturday morning. With Dyson's quiet, unwavering support, she had finished her associate degree at Piedmont College, before transferring to Georgia State University. She didn't just graduate, she dominated her program, going on to earn her master's degree in international hospitality management. Today, Josey was no longer inspecting suites. She was the senior vice president of global hospitality and guest experience for Urquhart Industries. She managed the service standards, executive training, and luxury protocols for his entire portfolio, including the massive, critically acclaimed eco-resort Dyson had finally opened in Seoul. Tonight's lavish gala at the Grand Monarch Hotel was supposed to be a celebration of that global expansion. At least, that is what Josey thought. The hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into a breathtaking indoor garden, inspired by the cherry blossoms of Seoul and the lush greenery of Georgia. Cascades of white orchids and pale pink blossoms hung from the 20-foot ceilings. The city's elite, politicians, CEOs, and celebrities, filled the room, but Josey's focus was professional. She was in a stunning asymmetrical blush pink gown, scanning the room to ensure the service was flawless. Dyson stood by her side, looking devastatingly handsome in a classic black tuxedo. His eyes rarely left her face, burning with a pride that had nothing to do with the hotel's profit margins. "Everything is perfect, SVP," Dyson whispered in her ear, his breath warm against her skin making her smile. "It can always be better, Mr. Urquhart," she shot back playfully. Before he could answer, the overhead lights dimmed softly, and Brenson, looking sharp and unusually formal in a suit, stepped up to the microphone on the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention," Brenson's voice echoed through the ballroom. "Tonight is about celebrating a milestone for Urquhart Industries, but more importantly, it's about celebrating the woman who gave this empire its heart. To speak more on that, we have a few very special guest speakers." Josey frowned slightly, looking at Dyson. "Dyson, this isn't on the itinerary." Dyson simply smiled, taking her hand and leading her toward the front row. The music swelled, and 3 figures stepped out from behind the velvet curtains. Josey's breath caught in her throat, her hand flying to her mouth as tears instantly rushed to her eyes. Her siblings. They had flown in from their respective corners of the country, keeping the entire plan a strict secret for months. And they weren't the struggling kids she had raised in her previous life. They were thriving. Her youngest brother, Leo, now a successful structural engineer in Chicago, took the microphone first. He looked sharp, confident, and incredibly grown up. "Most people in this room know Josey as a brilliant corporate executive," Leo began, his voice thick with emotion. "But before she was an SVP, she was our anchor. When our world fell apart years ago, Josey didn't run. She gave up her youth, her comfort, and her own dreams to make sure we had a roof over our heads and food on the table. She taught me how to be a man, not by lecturing me, but by showing me what true strength looks like." Josey's tears were flowing freely now. Beside her, Dyson squeezed her hand, his own jaw clenching as he fought back his emotions. Next stepped up Leslie, her sister, who had recently completed her residency at a top hospital in "There were nights," Leslie said, her voice cracking as she looked directly at Josey, where I knew Josey hadn't eaten so that Leo and I could have seconds. She hid her fear so beautifully that we actually believed we were safe. Josey, your strength didn't just protect us, it paved the way for us to thrive. We are who we are because you refused to break. By the time her oldest brother, Jeremy, now a successful attorney, took the mic to speak about her unyielding resilience, there wasn't a dry eye in the ballroom. Even the hardened executives in the audience were wiping away tears. Dyson looked down at Josey, a single rare tear escaping his eye and tracing down his cheek. He had seen her at her lowest, and he had seen her fight her way to the top. Hearing her siblings validate the beautiful, fierce soul he fell in love with completely leveled him. As the applause thundered through the room, her siblings stepped down from the stage, walking straight over to wrap Josey into a massive weeping family hug. When they finally pulled back, smiling through their tears, they stepped aside. The ballroom lights shifted to a warm, singular amber spotlight centered entirely on Josey and Dyson. Dyson took a deep breath, stepping into the light, completely shedding his usual stoic billionaire persona. He took both of her hands in his fingers trembling slightly. "Josey," Dyson began, his voice vibrating with a depth of emotion that silenced the entire room. "6 years ago, I swore an oath to myself that I would spend the rest of my life ensuring you never felt unsafe, unprotected, or unloved again. I watched you rebuild your life, conquer every obstacle, and command the respect of every room you walk into. You are the most brilliant, resilient, and magnificent woman I have ever known." He dropped slowly onto one knee. A collective, breathless gasp rippled through the hundreds of guests. Dyson reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a custom velvet box, opening it toward her. The crowd collectively gasped a second time, louder this time. Resting inside the box was a masterpiece of haute joaillerie. It was an exceptionally rare, flawless, 8-carat oval-cut argyle pink diamond. The magnificent, blushing stone was set in a delicate rose gold band, surrounded by a halo of micropave white diamonds that caught the light, refracting a brilliant, dazzling kaleidoscope of pink and white fire across the ballroom. It was opulent, over the top, and absolutely perfect. "You took care of everyone else for so long, baby," Dyson whispered, his eyes shining with absolute devotion. "Let me take care of you. Let me love you for the rest of our days. Josey, will you marry me?" Josey couldn't even speak. The sheer, elaborate beauty of the moment. Having her family there, seeing the man who had loved her through her darkest hours kneeling before her, overwhelmed her completely. She nodded vigorously, the tears spilling over her brilliant smile. "Yes, yes, Dyson, yes." The ballroom erupted into a deafening roar of cheers and applause. Dyson stood up, a magnificent grin breaking across his face as he slid the heavy, breathtaking pink diamond onto her finger. He caught her by the waist, lifting her slightly off the ground as he pulled her into a deep, breathless, passionate kiss. As the music flared and confetti began to rain down like snow, Josey looked past Dyson's shoulder at her siblings and her best friend Tracy, who were cheering and throwing their arms around Brenson and Mrs. Sawyer. The past was finally behind them. The trauma was gone. Standing in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by the family she had saved, Josey knew that her true life was only just beginning.